So today we're going to start a little bit differently and have a little trivia, have some questions planned for you. And these are based on some things that are written in the curriculum guide. So we'll see. We'll see who's looking at what, who's reading what. Okay, so here's the first one. You guys ready? And by the way, there's no monetary prize. No. You were doing this just for cool points, just for pride and feeling cool. All right, so here's the first question. Who was the preserver of the world's first Quran? Oh, I saw her hand raised.
Hafsa?
Yes. Oh, wait, hold on. Do you know her whole, can you give us any other information about her, who she was in relation to the Prophet, all of that?
Yeah, one of the wives of the Prophet, daughter of Umar.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was easy. I saw some people wanted to take those cool points, but you got them, Dr. Nayawiya. So Hafsa bint Omar was the official custodian of the original copy of the Quran, which she defended and preserved for all future generations to come. So Hafsa was the daughter of Omar ibn al-Khattab, one of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's most beloved companions. Hafsa was highly educated, had a very strong personality, just like her father Omar, and she was a hafidha, meaning she had memorized the entire Quran. After Hafsa's first husband died, the Prophet, peace be upon him, offered himself in marriage to her as her second husband. And although she didn't have children herself, the Prophet declared her one of the mothers of the believers. So after the Prophet, peace be upon him, died, the verses that had been written in the Quran were bound into a single book, making it the very first written copy of the entire Quran. Hafsa was then entrusted with this original bound copy until she died. And it is Hafsa's perfect copy of the Holy Quran that was reproduced and distributed around the world. And it's her copy that we all use all over the world today. So inshallah, we hope that here in our space, through our women-led Qur'an Literacy Program, we're continuing her amazing legacy of preserving the knowledge of the Quran. It's great to have all of you joining in this tradition. Okay, next question. Who was the owner of the two belts, and why was she given this nickname?
Was it Asma?
Zan got it. It's Asma bint Abu Bakr, was nicknamed the owner of the two belts by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because of how she helped save his life during an assassination attempt. So Asma was the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's best friend, Abu Bakr. She was also the Prophet's sister-in-law through his marriage to Aisha. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was fleeing his homeland due to assassination attempts on his life, he hid in a cave along the way with Abu Bakr. This famous emigration from Mecca to Medina was called the Hijra. Muslims all over the world are familiar with the spider who spun a web over the cave the Prophet was hiding in. And the spider web tricked the assassins into believing that no one could possibly be inside. But lesser known is the pivotal role that Asma bint Abu Bakr played in keeping the Prophet alive while he was in hiding. So Asma, while he was in hiding, she risked her life to bring food and water to the Prophet while he was with Abu Bakr in the cave during the Hijra. With no other means to hide the provision, Asma split her belt into two and hid the food within her second belt so that no one would notice. This is why the Prophet nicknamed her Dhat an-Nittaqain, or owner of the two belts. And we learned from Asma bint Abu Bakr that sometimes the smallest acts of bravery to support a person in need can have huge ripple effects on society for generations to come. Okay. Third famous Muslim woman. You guys ready for the last? I might do two more questions, actually, but the last famous Muslim. Who was the first official imam of a mosque appointed by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? Who was the first imam of a mosque officially appointed by the Prophet? All right, this has got to be common knowledge. We got to change this. Anybody? Her name was Waraka. So in the curriculum guide, it says, did you know the third mosque of Islam was run by a female imam? Oh, it's not like him, Ismail. In fact, Waraka bint Abdullah was the first official imam appointed by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Waraka was a devoted companion of the Prophet Muhammad, a Quran scholar, and one of the earliest companions to complete memorizing the entire Quran. She was appointed by the Prophet Muhammad as the imam of her own mixed-gender mosque. In the 15th year of the Prophet's mission, 6 years after daily prayers were made obligatory, and 2 years after building Masjid Quba and Masjid Nabawi, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established a third masjid in Medina and appointed Waraka as the imam. So there are differences of opinion regarding the size of Waraka's mosque. Some Islamic scholars and historians believe that her congregation was made up of the mixed-gender inhabitants of her home compound. Others believe her congregation consisted of her neighborhood, her clan, or her entire town. Regardless, it's reported in several hadiths or sayings or recorded quotes from the Prophet Muhammad's time that she led mixed-gender prayers in her mosque and had a male mu'adhin or caller to prayer. And we provided some links to those hadiths so you can read it for yourself. Last one, this one is not a famous Muslim woman, but it's a great quote. So does anyone know who said this quote? Knowledge without action is wastefulness, and action without knowledge is foolishness.
When I hear what you just said, the thing that goes in my mind is that if it is an Islamic saying or a hadith, I also kind of feel that there's been other sayings kind of along those same lines. Like one was the idea that like what good is a donkey that has tons of books on the side if you can't read it? And so I kind of hear that in the same saying. I don't know who to attribute it to. I know it's like one of those things that just falls in a vacuum. But I definitely agree with the saying.
Okay. Well, do you want to take a guess? Because that was a similar quote that you gave.
Yeah.
Yeah? It might have been the same person who said both. Who knows?
Honestly, I think like Ibn Battuta. I have no idea.
No, it's not an Ibn. It's an Imam al-Ghazali.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So Imam al-Ghazali was a scholar. I believe he was Iranian. People will say Persian, Iranian, same thing. And this is also part of what we're doing in our program is we're pulling from different sects, different areas and different scholars within the Islamic tradition and trying to unite. So people will often attribute him as being part of maybe the Sufi Muslim movement, but to us, he's just Muslim. So it's all part of our same tradition. We're trying to heal those divides, inshallah. Do we have a winner? All of us, there you go. That's the right answer. We all win because we all win because we all have the knowledge now. All right, great. Chapter 9, verse 71. If you guys want to pull it up at home or on your phones, you can read it with me. Otherwise, I'll just read it to you. And as you hear this verse being read, I'm going to actually give 3 different translations. So I'm going to give, on Islam Awakened, we've provided that link that has all of the different translations. I'll give a few different iterations of it. While I'm reading it, think about how you relate to the opposite gender. So the question in the curriculum was, do you do your part to both protect and receive protection from the opposite gender, or do you only expect protection to go one way, and why? Okay, so I'm going to read a few different translation, and then I'll ask the question again. Okay, so this is Muhammad Assad's translation first. He says, "And as for the believers, both men and women, they are close to one another. They all enjoin the doing of what is right and forbid the doing of what is wrong, and are constant in prayer, and render the purifying dues, and pay heed unto God and God's apostle. It is they upon whom God will bestow grace. Verily, God is almighty wise. Okay, next I'm going to read Dr. Lale Bakhtiar. She was the first female translator to translate into English. So she wrote, "The males, ones who believe, and the females, ones who believe, some are protectors of some other. They command to that which is honorable, and they prohibit that which is unlawful, and they perform the formal prayer, and give the purifying alms, and obey God and God's messenger. Those God will have mercy on them. Truly, God is almighty wise." And then the last one I will read is Yusuf Ali. Tends to be probably the most commonly read translation out there. So he wrote, "The believers, men and women, are protectors of one another. They enjoin what is just and forbid what is evil. They observe regular prayers, practice regular charity, and obey Allah and Allah's messenger. On them will Allah pour mercy, for Allah is exalted in power, wise." So the question was, think of how you relate to the opposite gender. Do you do your part to both protect and receive protection from the opposite gender? Or do you expect protection to only go one way? Why?
So I guess, like, how do I relate to the opposite gender, and do I take protection and do I give protection? So that's kind of the question that we're talking about. I mean, for me, I think that it should go both ways. There should be protection, and there should be acceptance of protection. I mean, if we look back to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he married Khadijah. Khadijah was financially protective of him at that certain point. And things, change, later in their marriage, in their life. So I don't think that the idea of protection is only maybe physical protection, which is, but usually the first thought I think of protection. I think there's emotional protection, there's family protection, there's protection of your goods. So that could be as protection of your children. And so, I do think that it's not far-fetched. I think what the ayah says is totally in line, I think, with protection goes back and forth between, men and women or different genders.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, yeah. And even protection of reputation, right? There are all sorts of, that's a great point. There's so many different ways to think about how we protect one another.
So just building on that, when you were talking about not just physical protection, the ayah itself kind of talks about that, because after they say, believing men and believing women are protectors of one another, what it mentions next is the non-physical, by enjoining what's right, forbidding what's wrong, establishing prayer, giving zakat, obeying. So I just noted that was similar to what you were saying.
So I wanted to add what I thought about that. When protection goes in the wrong direction and is one-sided, a lot of times I've seen protection be the flip side of oppression. So that's why the balance is important to keep, that we give it both male and female believers, and not just one giving protection to the other. That's why I think that's what's important.
Mm-hmm.
So just thinking through what that does to me in thinking about, because as a society we're kind of taught men are protectors of women, and what does that do to the psyche of women, versus thinking I have a role here, I am supposed to protect other women and other men. I think by having that as your basis, that impacts your psyche, and I think you show up in a different way with that sense of I have agency and I have power and I have a purpose in this space. I think that's powerful.
Yeah, we're now in almost our 10th year of the Women's Mosque of America. And when we first started and we were covered in the news, the framework of how people covered us who maybe weren't familiar with Islam from a Muslim perspective was all framing us as if we were these downtrodden, sad, pathetic Muslim women who were fighting back against male oppressors and starting a mosque of our own, when in reality, this whole mosque and movement was coming from a place of celebration of Islam and a celebration of the rights and empowerment and equality that is inherent in our religion. So that was an interesting journey in the beginning to see, what were people's assumptions. But I've also, over the past decade, I've also seen exactly what you're talking about, Nadia, how sometimes if someone has internalized that sort of outsider framework, they can actually end up showing up with sort of like, not even so far as to say like victim mentality, but assuming that they're weak. And when you assume that you're weak instead of assuming that you're equal or that you have power and agency, it does end up kind of self-sabotaging your own rights in a way. There were a few verses in this past month about water and about the sea, and even about how Pharaoh could not survive the ocean. So we had a few different sort of verses and days that were dedicated to exploring water and the ocean and the power of the ocean in more detail. Chapter 10, verse 22. God it is who enables you to travel on land and sea. And behold what happens when you go to sea in ships. They go to sea in ships, and they sail on in them in a favorable wind, and they rejoice until there comes upon them a tempest, and waves surge towards them from all sides, so that they believe themselves to be encompassed by death, and then they call unto God, at that moment sincere in their faith in God alone. If thou wilt but save us from this, we shall most certainly be among the grateful. Yet, as soon as God has saved them from this danger, lo, they behave outrageously on earth, offending against all right. O humans, your outrageous deeds are bound to fall back on your own selves. You care only for the enjoyment of this life, or of life in this world, but remember that in the end, unto us you must return, whereupon we shall make you truly understand all that you are doing in this life. And then it goes on to say so the first one was about the ocean, right? Then the next verse is about rain. The parable of the life of this world is that but of rain, which we send down from the sky, and which is absorbed by the plants of the earth, whereof humans and animals draw nourishment, until when the earth has assumed its artful adornment and has been embellished, and they who dwell on it believe that they have gained mastery over it, there comes down upon it our judgment, by day or by night or by day, and we cause it to become like a field mown down, as if there had been no yesterday. Thus do we clearly spell out these messages unto people who think, and know that God invites the human unto the abode of peace and guides them that wills to be guided onto a straight way. If we just think about those two ways of relating to water, right? The first one, people are in a ship, and all of a sudden this huge storm, tempest comes, and all of a sudden they're humbled in their heart, calling unto God. God saves them, and then as soon as they're saved, they go back on land, forget. Then in the second sort of story or parable, people are slowly growing their crops and fields and fruits and vegetables maybe with rain, and starting to grow arrogant with seeing their success incrementally increase until they start to believe that it's them who has created this growth. And in that moment, God can destroy the whole thing. So I'd love to hear just, because there's so many different angles we can look at these two comparisons. There's so much richness within these verses. It would be interesting to just hear, what are your immediate thoughts and feelings that come up when you hear these verses? What comes to mind? What does it make you think of? And how do you relate to these metaphors?
Yeah, like I like the concept of water in general, because like the first thing is that like when I look at the idea of the science of water and the idea of like life, and that water or some type of liquid is necessary for life, so that in it itself, it's really a cool idea. The second thing too is that there's a lot of like mindfulness meditation going on. And one of the things that they say is that like, it's like a wave goes up and a wave goes down. And like we're all connected, through this body of water, through this ocean. And we just happen to take a form in this life, and that's the wave. And then as we pass, you pass back in to that ocean or that body of water. And so like when I think about the waves and the tempests and, and the storm, I mean, this is God saying like, we're from that wave, from that ocean, from that body of water, and we will go back to that wave, to that body of water. And, we take on this form right now. And the idea of like, water coming down and men getting very ignorant, or humankind getting very ignorant and arrogant, that, kind of saying like, oh, this is a pattern, like us as human beings, us as species, like we're, at least for me, my understanding is that like we're very repetitive. We think about patterns, we identify patterns. And if the pattern is like you're always getting rewarded every time a crop grows, I mean, like, it's hard to not become arrogant in that situation, because it becomes expectation that like I plant a crop is gonna grow. And I think that right now, the beauty that I see in that verse is that almost like don't become complacent with the gifts that you do have. Like even though you may have, or I may have become reliant on the repetition of like the benefits that are given from food and crops and shelter, it's always a blessing that you do have it. And practicing that gratefulness, I think it's a challenge.
Yeah. Oh, and Iqbal said, Sophia said she protects me from myself. That's a great one.
It's really important.
Yes.
I basically wanted to echo what was said. When I was hearing those two, passages, I was thinking about how we do take for granted when things are going really well, or our lives are stable, or we're able to pay the bills, and we have an okay place to live. And I think we do attribute that to ourselves, or how much control we have over a situation or the decisions we're making. But as we see in the world around us, everything can be upended, and you cannot count on, certain things happening. So just appreciating when things are good and stable and wonderful, and maybe helping others who are not experiencing that same stability. But it was just kind of a reminder to me in hearing both of those about not to get arrogant, not to get complacent, and to just appreciate when things are going well, but to know that things can change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was interesting for me, because I haven't gotten to this part in the reading, to hear when I heard the word tempest, and how I am from an island community in Southeast Alaska where lots of people work and live on the ocean. And so when I just heard the word tempest, I was thinking about tsunami warnings and this vulnerability in the midst of like seeing this awesome power and this amazing strength with the ocean. And that was just something that I had never really thought about. Like I think of God with the amazing community that I'm from, but I didn't think about it in terms of like God and the ocean and this combination of like life-giving substance, which we get from the ocean, and that nourishes the rainforest, but yet also can and has like caused like destruction and death of people like in my own community. So yeah, just sitting with that a little bit.
Amazing. I love this. We're hearing from Alaska, we're hearing from Hawaii, from Pakistan today. And it's amazing to hear how, based on where we are geographically, culturally, age-wise, like there's so many layers to uncover within the Quran's meaning. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. It's really wonderful to hear that the ocean has this vulnerable effect, or this humbling effect on the people of Alaska.
I jotted that down as my favorite verse for this month.
Oh, okay.
In particular, the last part of that about people who don't really think that they have mastery over this, and it made me think, as an environmentalist, about people who think that they have mastery or were meant to master nature itself, and don't give God the credit as they should. And it becomes something in the end, as we saw with Noah and the people who were destroyed, the very thing that destroys them, the thing that, and I think it says in one of the verses that we read, the very thing that they deride is what overwhelms them and destroys them. And then there was another verse that says something like, the throne of God's mightiness is on water, or something to that effect. So it kind of brought everything back again to water and its importance.
Yeah, that was actually going to be the next question. So perfect transition. So in chapter 11, verse 7, God says that God's throne rests upon water. So what do you think this means? And I'm going to read a few different translations of it as well, because there are different ways to sort of interpret it based on, what specific words you're breaking this down into. So it's talking about the creation of the world. So why don't I'll give the whole verse from Muhammad Assad, and then the alternate translations, I'll just give the alternates of that one phrase alone. So Muhammad Assad's translation says, "And it is God who has created the heavens and the earth in 6 aeons, or spans of time. And ever since God has willed to create life, the throne of God's almightiness has rested upon water. God reminds you of your dependence on God in order to test you and to make manifest which of you is best in conduct. For thus it is, if thou sayest unto humans, behold, you shall be raised again after death, they who are bent on denying the truth are sure to answer, this is clearly nothing but an enchanting delusion." So Muhammad Assad translates this line as, God's almightiness has rested upon water. Dr. Lale Bakhtiar says, and God's throne had been upon the waters. And then Yusuf Ali says, and God's throne was over the waters. So how do you guys interpret that? There's so many ways to interpret it.
Well, I guess I don't really have an interpretation, but it kind of does remind me of just like kind of what you said about how we all rely on water to survive, and nothing like grows or lives without water.
That idea just gave me this other idea that, like, for me, maybe the whole idea of ocean of water, maybe the water actually is like life. Like you're the throne over all life, no matter where it's at. And like absolute control over that life.
The next part of the verse, so when it says, okay, his throne is over water, if we're thinking it's over life, it says, and if you, O prophet, say, surely you will all be raised up after death, they say this is nothing but magic. So that it makes that interpretation to me is like, we're talking about he controls everything in life, just like he can bring life out of death.
So I was just thinking of it as something over water meaning, it's moving, it's changing, it's not necessarily set in stone. So maybe this might represent a free will of humans to where there are many paths, many ways to flow.
Awesome. I've never heard that before. I love this. It's a new perspective. Yeah. And there is an upcoming verse that we'll read later on that says literally that all life comes from water. So I always enjoy the scientific element. So that's another take to think about it from.
I remember someone saying once about finding purpose, or finding when you feel lost. She says, if you're religious, think about that there being a God above you. If you're not, go to the beach and look over the ocean, that there is something greater than you. And so it was interesting to me that was her thing for if you don't believe in God, go to the ocean, because the water in the ocean can overtake you. It's more powerful. And then thinking, what's even more powerful than that? Well, Allah's throne is over the water. So that was my connection.
Another take is, I was just trying to, I don't think it completely fits, but if you look at like the periodic table of elements, the one element that all of the other elements rest upon is hydrogen, but it's not water, so that's why I don't want to like read too much into it. But I did think that was interesting. H2O is what makes up water, and hydrogen is that fundamental element out of all the matter that we have in this dunya, or worldly life. So God clearly tells us in the Quran that the test of this life is to find out which one of us is best in actions, deeds, and behaviors. Is this how you measure success on a daily level? If not, what metric do you currently use to measure your own success?
I've been wrestling with this idea myself. First of all, like a hierarchy of people. I mean, I don't think that that's what God really means when he says best of actions and deeds. I think that the idea of a best in actions and deeds may be a way to explain, maybe to humans, what God wants from us. And I'll go back to the metric that I use. But then I want to get into this idea of first of all, the free will, and the idea of our actions and deeds. Right now, if there's actions that I cannot perform. There's actions that a lot of people cannot perform. You are physically, mentally, even emotionally limited to do certain things. So the best of actions and deeds are only those that are given to you by God, right? Right now, if I'm the president of the United States, I can change a lot of stuff. If I'm not, if I'm just a citizen, I can do stuff, right? I'm not going to play the hopelessness card. But there are realities, there are limitations. I can feel that I can float, but obviously there's laws about that. So when you go back to the actions and deeds, there's the actions and deeds that are given to me, the options that are placed in front of me and I can choose. And then maybe it's well, what are my best options that are given to me right in front of me? And then the way that I measure that is to, one, try to remind myself to be grateful for these options that I do have. The fact of I didn't pick my parents, I didn't pick anything. I didn't pick you could say job or interest. Even then, people say personalities are born, in the womb. So giving all this information, it's too nebulous, it's too overwhelming, like the vastness of the ocean, for you to say that this person is better than this person. So I think that ultimately the best actions and deeds, you have that example of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but other than that, I think that we're all shooting in the dark for actions and deeds.
And then you were going to say your own metric as well?
I guess my own metric would be, gratefulness. Because it's almost the fact that I'm breathing, I'm healthy, I'm 6 foot. I could be like, you know what I mean? Like I have legs. It's like I didn't have any control over that. It's not like I did anything specific. I go to sleep and I wake up. I don't have control over that. I mean, there's unconscious processes happening. There's consciousness that I don't control. And giving all that whole aspect is like, the more that the metric that I try to tell myself is that I love this hadith where, like, there's 2 guys and like they're praying, and after that the Prophet points at that guy. He's like, oh, he's like a companion, or he's like a person of Jannah. And then the other guy looks, he's like, really? Like this dude? Like I don't think so. And so he like pretty much like cuts him out and like follows him. And like when he follows him, he sees that like he's not praying that much, or like he makes his 5 daily prayers, but he's not like obsessive, where like he's hitting like tahajjud and doing everything. But the thing that he did like was really crazy was that before he went to sleep, he just tried to forgive everybody. And I think going back to metric, like there's things that I can do, there's things that I can't do. And, inshallah, like God can give me that ability to be one of those people that can go to sleep and forgive everybody. So the metric I try to do is like fall asleep.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I know you were saying it's not necessarily about ranking humans, but if it is about ranking humans on an invisible plane, that's kind of what you're describing is, yes, this person is better than this other person, but only God knows what's in their heart. And only God knows the truth, because we can see someone doing an outward action, but maybe they have horrible intentions, right?
Get a resort?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, like, I just don't understand hierarchy. Like, I think this is something that we have created as a society. And like right now, the way that God, I feel like, is communicating is through concepts that we do know. Like hierarchy, we think above and below, but what does above and below mean to the being that created everything? Like we need a relative point to know up and down, right? So this hierarchy is like, it's always God. And I just have a hard time accepting the idea that God will distinguish between, like 7 layers of heaven and like who's righteous and who's not righteous. I think ultimately I believe in the creator who's like the most gracious, the most merciful. And I think if he were to rank, or God were to rank people, it would be for the benefit of that person. But I think our concept of like power and high and power and low may not be the idea of ranking, at least in my mind.
What about the ranking of nearness and farness to God?
Yeah, I mean, like that. I think is more. I'm really receptive to that concept, right? Of like how near or far you're away, with the idea of rank, because then at the same time, I can see that as an aspect of like understanding, and identifying those best in actions and deeds to emulate and to learn how they gained that closeness, how they elevated themselves in that aspect. But as far as like status, I don't believe that. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and building off of that too, it's like, these ranks or status, if you want to put it that way, as we view it in our human life, is usually static, right? It's like you go through the ranks of a school, you're done with that level, you go to the next one, and it's a static label and rank that you hold the rest of your life, has no bearing on your actions after that point. Whereas if we're talking about spiritual ranks that only God knows, and only God knows the nature of, if it's up or down, near or far, or whatever else it might be, that is always fluctuating, and it's always something that can change in a moment.
Why even create the concept? Like what usefulness is the concept, right? So it's like, I don't believe that God makes things like without a purpose, right? So there's a purpose for this ranking. I mean, show me what the purpose for the ranking would be. If it's on a spiritual plane that only God knows, I mean, like, how does that help us? We don't have that same knowledge.
I think the purpose is, the Quran is revealed in response to who the people are at the time, and the people at the time, rank was very important. So it has to, it's turning that on its head, that for you, rank is wealth and sons, but what's really important is actions. But even in actions, I'm thinking about what you said about there's only so much in my locus of control. I'm not the president of the United States. So even that is putting the idea of actions into a ranking of, because the assumption in that is that better actions are those with more impact, I guess, on people, right? And then if you look at the hadith, actions are judged by their intentions, then it would be the best of actions are the ones with the best of intentions. And now you've got something that's a level playing field across. So what I do instead of trying to have a broader action is to really purify my intention, and it could even be the smallest action that could be worth the most in the eyes of God.
I really appreciate the way the Quran kind of delineates priorities for people in your life and actions that you can take, and charitable and justice-oriented actions, because sometimes I feel like as a human, simply paying your bills and maintaining your health and doing these basic things takes a lot of energy. And so it's helpful to have the reminder, as I've been reading through, of like, take care of your close family first. Orphans are a top priority for charity. Liberating people from oppression. Just like having a couple of things that you can focus on rather than, do everything perfectly and be the perfect person. So I kind of appreciate that prioritization and having that spelled out of try to focus on this.
What came to my mind was the test that Allah lays in for success later on in Quran, in the 30th para, in Surah Asr. So it says, all mankind is at a loss, except those, and it lays down 4 criteria for success, which is different from how we measure success, in society, which is, people who have iman, and people who do the good deeds, and people who enjoin others to speak the truth and have patience in hardship. So that came to my mind as we were talking about measures of success. Just wanted to share that.
Like right now, I think right now we define we need priorities, right? And God gave us a set of priorities. We know that during the time, they had a status that represented what was most important to them, and it's flipping it on the head. And so how do we take that concept and define what success is, right? Because right now, what was just said was that we do good deeds, we do it for success. And right now, the concept that I know of that was taught to me and that I've seen repeated is that worship God. When you see people are oppressed, you see orphans taken advantage of. You see women who did not have their just due, their rights, they could not own property. You see so much injustice in the world, right? And so was everybody aligned with the idea of this is what we want the world to be? This is what success is. This is what it means to, be a Muslim, right? And do we have that same definition for that today? And if it is that same definitions, how are the actions aligning to those same definitions of success?
I guess what being successful would be knowing how to do the balancing act of being able to take care of yourself, but also doing good deeds and doing something that's meaningful for you, and then also bringing meaning to the lives of other people around you, and not starving and not struggling, but thriving. I think that could be a metric of success.
Where do you think the phrase build an empire comes from, and why has it gone viral among youth and entrepreneurs today? So I'm not sure how familiar people are with this phrase, but at least I hear it a lot amongst youth and amongst entrepreneurs, where people are talking about, and a lot of times it's people who are working towards something good or a good goal, but they will say, I'm going to build an empire. I want to build an empire. And obviously, we've read already so many verses about Pharaoh, who owned an empire, and all of the things that go into an empire, and the fact that empires fail. And it is this extreme sort of conquer and domination vision of success. So yeah, I wanted to know, first of all, has anyone heard that phrase being used in the past decade or so? And where do you think it's come from? And why do you think it is so popular today?
But I don't think I know exactly why. But if I had to take a guess, I think it's like a power thing, maybe. Feeling like you've made it to like the top kind of thing.
Yeah, in that sense, it can go both ways, right? It can come from a place of maybe someone suffering so much that they need an extreme goal to overcome it, or an extreme vision. But if that's the case, or if that's the origin, then maybe we need to think about why so many people are feeling that way. So many people are feeling so downtrodden that they need to reach for a vision of success that's the complete opposite. And that's actually oppressive in nature.
Like when I never heard that, build an empire. It definitely sounds like hip hop-ish, or like some type of, new culture slang or something like that. But like the idea that I thought just in my head when you said build an empire and Pharaoh, and going back to the whole idea, is that I was talking to my wife recently, and we had this like really like epiphany moment when we were talking. We were saying like you could spend your life, going up the hill to the mountaintop. It only takes one step to fall off, right? And it's like you worked your whole life to get, to somewhere, and it can go over in like one sec. And like the thought that comes to my mind when it says build an empire, it's like if there was no enemy, if there was no challenge, like would people even ask the question build an empire? Like if the world was perfect, right? Would there be a concept of like a fighting, right? But I mean that's not the world. But to me it's like a thought experiment that if we were to see like everybody aligned on the same page, what would be the motivational goal? So like when I hear build an empire, my concept goes like I'm trying to push my prerogative, my ideas throughout the world, whether positive or negative at the same time. And like I said, I think that positive, negative is relative to the majority of people. But when we interpret it as Islam, I think we have our own definition of right and wrong. And I would align that like the definition that I would like to spread as a Muslim is like one of peace, understanding, cooperation, but not pacifism. But at the same time, though, is that those who do not have power, it's almost like what you said, like those who have knowledge but no action, those who have great will and great desire with no power. It's kind of the same way in my mind. Is that how can you put forth your ideas if you do not have the power to make people at least look at your situation?
I've never heard that phrase before, build an empire, but what it also, like what you all said, it talks about power, but also I feel there's a large sense of loss of control right now. So if you build an empire, you get power, but you also get the control back. So maybe that's could be part of it too.
I'll share the first time I ever heard someone use that phrase. I was just graduating from film school and talking to different, agents, producers, and managers. And there was one actually Muslim manager who he was just a friend of mine, but he used that phrase, and he was like, oh, the way Howard Hughes built an empire. You see Howard Hughes on everything, his name on everything. I want to build an empire. And I remember being like, what? I was like not aligned with that vision, and it wasn't a match between, for us to work together either. But yeah, that was my first time hearing it. And then over, I think, the last decade, I've heard it more and more. A lot in like maybe online spaces, entrepreneurial spaces, YouTube, a lot of, I would say, Gen Z and below. I'll hear it over and over again. And it tends to be people who are trying to build some sort of business or, I've actually heard someone also say, I'm trying not to name names, but one public figure who was talking about wanting to build a media empire, basically to take over, the media. So I guess maybe it's something that I've heard in the media circles, and in the past few years, I think there is even a TV show called Empire now. I've never seen it though, so I don't want to comment on it. But I've definitely heard a lot of young people today saying, I want to build an empire, as like kind of a rallying call of their dream and vision.
So a couple of things I'm thinking about. Well, first, there was a computer game we used to play in school called Dino Park Tycoon. No, Dino Park Tycoon. Okay. So it basically, you're supposed to create this amusement park for dinosaurs, and you create one thing really well, and you have to then go out and make it bigger and bigger, and the bigger and bigger you get, the better you win the game. But I'm thinking about this in relation to our conversation we just had around actions and what type of actions are the best if Allah is judging us by our actions. Because my immediate thought when you said build your empire is in the sense of, if you're doing something good, you're considered successful if you can make that good thing into a huge nonprofit, or if you're in one town doing it, then you spread it to different towns, or if you're that we always think that we measure success by how vast your reach is. And even when we think, I know my daughter has a book of famous women, and they always talk about the ones who had wide impact. So if we rethink this idea of actions, not in terms of who has the biggest action or who has multiplied their actions, but bring it back internal to whose action has the intention of pleasing Allah only. And if that's what it's all about, then it's not about, do you build it bigger and bigger and bigger to consider it to be successful, but are you doing it for the sake of Allah, even if it's really small? So that's my connection there.
This is underneath that section in the curriculum. So it says, how does an empire building attitude and cultural pace affect all areas of life, including children, the environment, and our expectations of ourselves?
So that's deep. So do you mean empire in terms of empires that are built, or empire in terms of like a...
However you want to...
well, if you think of building an empire, you're thinking of doing away with the indigenous thought, the indigenous belief, the indigenous way of life, and imposing yours on that. The effect is the colonialization, that people want to be, look like, sound like, act like, think like the one who has power in that. And then connecting it to, let's say you are starting a nonprofit for helping kids with XYZ, you tutoring service. And now you want to build your empire. You want your tutoring service to be the best tutoring service out there, and you want your clientele to go from these 12 kids to 100 kids. Suddenly the intention of it has become not necessarily, am I providing this service for the sake of Allah, but it's become, am I better than that tutoring service over there? Am I advertising better than that? And you're comparing, your model of success is comparing it to somebody else as opposed to comparing it to what Allah wants. So I think you're in empire building, your whole mindset shifts, which then, I mean, impacts the kids you're serving. The decisions you're making are not about necessarily what's best for that child, but what brings the most profit or what makes you bigger and all of that.
Yeah, almost sounds like a focus on quantity rather than quality. And all the things that come along with that, you know, that sort of overwhelming pace and what it takes and the people you have to ignore in your life or the children you have to ignore in your life, the environmental impacts you have to ignore to get that sort of reach and spread, and even how you treat yourself if you can't reach those goals, how harsh you are with yourself because of your expectations of yourself.
I know we're talking about building an empire, but I feel like the underlying assumption that we're making when we say building an empire, that there's only one empire, right? Like there's one empire that's going to take over everything. And I feel like that is like a zero-sum game, meaning like, you know, because I eat, that means you can't eat. And why can't it be like we're all going to eat? And so I think that's something that's interesting. But I think also the way that I can see it playing out in culture is the idea of like status, right? Like I want my empire to last. And I don't know if you guys saw the Netflix show Painkillers.
Oh, I heard about it.
Yeah, about I think it's Oxycontin or Oxycontin.
Can you give a little quick recap?
Okay, so there's a Netflix show called Painkillers, and it's about the Richard Sackler family, and they actually are from Purdue Pharma. And so he comes from a long line of chemists and I guess like people who are really good at selling. And like his goal is to make sure the Sackler family has a good reputation. And there's a really good scene in that Netflix show where he talked about Alfred Nobel, which is like the Nobel Peace Prize. Because when we think about Nobel Peace Prize, it's like, oh, that's crazy. Like that's like the epitome, the best thing you can ever do. And they said that Alfred Nobel got all his money by being the inventor of dynamite. And we think about the destruction that dynamite caused, but nobody, I mean, I did not know, let's just put it there. I didn't know that Alfred Nobel, made dynamite. I definitely know what the Nobel Peace Prize is, but I don't know that Alfred Nobel made dynamite. And going back to that building an empire, it's that he has an empire going on because like right now, I'm pretty sure that little kids and the famous woman that probably are in that children's book, they're gonna talk about the Nobel Peace Prize. So like going back to that, I think that is the true definition of an empire. Is not necessarily like vastness, wealth, and material. It's that propagation of your ideas along the lines of, I think what Nadia said about removing or like eliminating the indigenous mindset and culture. Like, I think going back to like the Native Americans and the idea of like no waste. And now suddenly everybody's eco-friendly? Like we were not the inventors, but that whole idea is being usurped. Like it's new. You can pay a carbon tax now to offset carbon. It's like you capitalize and you made an economy out of something that was talking about no use. I mean, like that is pretty bold, and I think that's also a just like an ingenious idea of how to push your ideas further, but also amalgamate and like kind of take in other things. And so like when I see building an empire, I'm like capitalism and I forgot like Adam Smith, like all these people, like that dude is like, I don't know, like 400 years of an empire. So
Yeah, and there is an image in the curriculum where it's that famous image of the bison, all of the uses, the Native American uses of the bison. And so kind of questioning, these things that were sold, these new movements of, whether, no judgment if you are or not, but things that are marketed to us as new ideas, like veganism is the only way to be environmentally friendly, completely ignores the history of indigenous uses of hunting and eating just enough meat. We don't have to eat all the meat. And yeah, that's a great reflection.
I appreciated what everyone said. It kind of sounds like what we're saying is that building an empire is not really a Muslim way to see how we should structure our societies. Maybe we need to build a Medina and not an empire.
With that, thank you all for joining us for another amazing discussion circle. I know everybody's reading at their own pace, so don't worry. There's no such thing as being behind. We do ask, though, if you've joined this program, make sure you finish. So it doesn't matter if it takes you 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Let's try not to make it more than 4 years. But but finish reading the Quran and use the curriculum guide as a way to explore different points of view, think deeper. Today, we just started the Prophet Yusuf's chapter in the Quran. So I want to emphasize, yes, this is a story. It is probably one of the richest sources. I mean, all of the Quran is rich in meaning and material, but please resist the urge to just read it like a story. So read into it. Every single element of it, there's so much wisdom in it. There's so much, even if you were just to take the lens of, I want to track how people's hopes and fears play out within this story, and the way that people either accidentally bless themselves, accidentally curse themselves, right? Or you could look at the whole story from the lens of what is the proper way to deal with a dysfunctional family, or even, I don't want to give too much away, but it's such a rich story. Just a little disclaimer, don't read it just as a storybook, like, this is an easy read. Really stop and reflect at each thing, each element and verse within the story, and just ponder a little deeper, and ask yourself, put yourself in the shoes of all of the people within the story, whether they're good or bad, doing good or bad. And inshallah, you'll get a lot of great lessons and wisdom and meaning out of it. So thank you again for coming. Inshallah, our next discussion circle is going to be Sunday, July 7th, and it's going to be our 6-month discussion circle. So we're hitting our halfway mark. And yeah, thank you for everyone who keeps showing up. I know this is our first year, so thank you for your patience. You're really helping us build this program so that inshallah next year we can really present it in its final iteration. So thank you again. Assalamu alaikum.